was a breakthrough, it was unprecedented, it was significant, but I would like to correct the record a little bit. The New York Times had virtually no impact on the legislative or executive branch of the government. I thought Congress would be seized with it. They'll be demanding briefings, demanding to know what's going on. That's not what happened, to my great surprise. Marks a turning point in the history of this issue. But had it been that story alone, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
If you believe we have crashed craft safely here, do we have the bodies of the pilots?
As I've stated publicly already, non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge of the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
Now, the committee says this could be the first of several hearings, with some lawmakers saying next they would like to hear directly from some of the pilots who have encountered those objects firsthand.
What changed? If it wasn't the New York Times, then what made the difference?
Pilots. That's what really made the difference. It was the face-to-face with the naval aviators, describing their experiences.
When I pursued this, my personal logic was that, hey, I'm representing myself. I'm going to talk. I'm not going to be wearing uniform. I'm not going to say I'm Lieutenant Graves and I'm saying X, Y, or Z. I just wanted to speak as someone that had experiences, that was talking about them in my own time. From my perspective, I knew that what I was doing was well outside the bounds of what would be considered acceptable behavior from my command structure or anything like that, but I really didn't see any other way that this was going to resolve this status quo.
Ryan was initially, understandably, very reluctant to come and speak to members of the Congress, and it was a bit of soul-searching on his part.
What to me is so intriguing about it is, in the past, if a pilot saw something, there wasn't any way of really corroborating, was this human error, was this fatigue on the pilot's behalf, was this a problem with the instrumentation? But now there are any number of documented incidences where there are multiple instruments recording something out there. So it's not just the pilot, it's not just one tool. There is something there. There is something provably there. And at least initially, it cannot be explained.
I just knew that I had a responsibility to talk about what I knew and describe what I knew and what I didn't know as clearly as possible. I ended up going to the Pentagon to kind of start the conversation. We transitioned from the Pentagon up to the Senate Armed Reserves Committee. We had a closed-door meeting. I mean, honestly, I was pretty terrified, frankly. Did not want to go there, if you will. I did not want to go there.
Ryan was one of the first pilots, maybe the first pilot, to come forward and brief members of the armed services and intelligence committees behind closed doors. It was pretty clear that this was not necessarily going to be well received by his colleagues in his squadron and by other Navy officials, and yet he decided to do so.
At least I can say at some point in my life, I really, truly pursued something that I felt I believed in.
You've also, I believe, discussed and know of many more pilots. This is just those that you're currently working with. Is that correct? Can you expand on that?
When we were first experiencing these objects off the eastern seaboard in the 2014 to 2015 time period, anyone that had upgraded their radar systems were seeing these objects.
I didn't have a massive interest in UFOs growing up. I kind of a standard interest that I guess most young people do with X-Files and ET and things and movies. It was only in 2017 when the New York Times article came out that my interest was really peaked. And I think at that point, I was hooked, absolutely hooked. And so I wanted to kind of document where my mind was going on the subject. And so So I created an Instagram account in early 2023. I kind of came in at the right time where the congressional hearing was happening, and I think I was one of the only, if not the only person putting content out in real time.
Mr. Fravor, the Tic Tac incident that you were engaged occurred in 2004. What kind of reporting took place after that incident?
None. We had a standard debrief where the backseaters went down to our carrier intel center and briefed what had happened, and that was it.
In the UK, they're a lot more reserved, I think, about the subject, and we haven't seen much talk from the government at all. The congressional hearings were just groundbreaking because we'd never had anybody ever in history on oath saying these things are real and these are my experiences in front of Congress with the hand up, passing off their experiences for the world to see live on TV. It was just incredible.
You would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's zero airspeed. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds of 1.1, 1.2 Mach. And they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Stories are anecdotes, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, in medical literature, you can write about a case report, which is an anecdote of a single individual story, and that goes into the literature. There are traditional and standard ways to get stories as long as there's data associated with it. Now, let's talk about the science of it. If you have 100 people who've got the same internal scarring, looking at the brain scans, that's data. And so that's something that needs an explanation. How did a person get all of these lesions in their brain and they don't have multiple sclerosis? Is there a commonality that we can observe? And there was a couple of reports in the literature that I found that linked this area of the brain to intuition. And that was interesting because I thought, well, wait a second, intuition in an area of the brain that has to do with body movement? Let's say that you're at a party and you're walking around the room. You need to predict where people are moving, but that moment when somebody does something unexpected, you have to react to it quickly. So those are life and death moments, as it turns out, because let's say you're in a forest and a wolf or a cheetah is jumping out. You need to be able to know to make the intuitively correct move. All the studies that have come since then have said that intuition, whatever it is that you want to call intuition, resides in this part of the brain. I've looked at the data and I say that there's something worth studying here. I'm only here to give you the data. You guys can argue till the cows come home what it is. I'm just telling you what's there. I'm not coming to any conclusions.
A lot of these pilots don't know what they're seeing. They don't know if they're from our government, above their pay grade. They don't know if they're from adversaries, state actors, non-state actors, private entities. So we have to talk about these things and create an environment where other people are comfortable and feel safe enough to discuss this very serious issue.
You got a lot of pilots out there who've seen things independently who've been too afraid to say anything.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was striking in having a chance over the course of a couple of years to get to know Senator Harry Reid. You know, learning from him, number one, why he's interested in this issue, and why he, some would say, risked his political high by creating a UFO program. I mean, all of his staffers at the time were like, don't do this, even if it's secret. If it leaks out, you're going to look like a kook. But he didn't really care. He talked to some of these fellow senators, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska, Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, both World War II veterans, who were like, almost immediately, oh yeah, we should totally look into this. Ted Stevens said he saw Foo Fighters off his wing as an Army Air Corps pilot over Europe. You know, people would come back and would be like, we saw those things again. No idea what they are, but they didn't attack us, so I guess we're okay. We didn't talk about it for 40 years.
Democratic Senator from Ohio, John Glenn, 62, is very much a hero in a country that loves to love a national figure.
John Glenn, he said, was another one who was like, we absolutely should be doing all these things for this. But again, these were not guys who said this publicly because in that era, you just didn't do that. Now, I think the stigma is changing.
We managed to get the attention of the government, both the legislative and the executive branches. And we now have the real prospect within the next 24 months, say, of finding out possibly where the origin of some of these things are, or where some of them might be extraterrestrial.
I'm not the only one who is. There are other people here.
There's a massive sense of responsibility now. I think when I first started posting videos, it was just whatever I found interesting.
It just keeps on going in circles and circles and circles.
And so now, as I go further along, every time I see new bits of footage or people send things to me, I put out less and less and less and less and less because I have that responsibility. So I'm really careful in what I put out. And now somebody will send me something and I'll ask them, where's this come from? Have you got the original? Do you know where the original came from? Who took the footage? There's other footage out there that's better, that's more compelling, but we don't know who took it. We can't follow back that chain of custody to somebody that's super credible on a platform that we can trust.
Boom.
What is that?
We are all out here in the middle of this parking lot. Is it possible for you to contrast the program that you initially wrote about with the program today?
So ATIP was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was set up in 2007 at the direction of Congress, mainly to look into these reports from military pilots.
ATIP was a very small operation within the Pentagon.
It didn't get very far either. The senior leadership of the Pentagon doesn't want to hear about it. They don't want to spend resources on it.
It didn't have funding in the later years. There was just a group of dedicated people who kept on doing what they were doing before, and they did have some funding. That entity was kind of transformed numerous times. It became the UAP Task Force, and a couple of years there, and that was acknowledged by the Office of the Director of Naval Intelligence that that entity existed. And that evolved. It kept changing its name, and then it became this all-domain. What is it? The all-domain.
Advanced.
No, I know what it is. All-domain. What's the R?
The All-Domain Anomalous Resolution Office. It's a horrible name. Acronym is ARROW. Leave it to the Pentagon to come up with something like that.
It's great that it has an easy acronym because some of the previous names were absolutely insane. You couldn't even say them, and let alone say an acronym for them.
Fuck the Pentagon with these acronyms. It's called the UFO Office. I mean, come on.
A Pentagon official confirmed this week that the U.S. government is investigating more than 650 potential UFO sightings. A team is examining the 650 cases.
This office is up and running. I'm working with colleagues to make sure it's fully funded.
So clearly the Pentagon is taking UFOs seriously.
And really, they're supposed to be the focal point that is researching not just sightings made by military personnel that come in, but also trying to dig into the bureaucracy and figure out what else do we know, or what did we know and when did we know it.
This is altogether different, fundamentally different. Now you've got an organization that's out in the open, enjoys very strong support from Congress. It has a very wide mandate and a lot of latitude. It's got a large staff, it's growing, and you have the support from the intelligence community. You have direct access to the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. Now, all the national security agencies, all the intelligence agencies have to share information on this topic with this Aero office. All the puzzle pieces are now on one table, and you can start fitting them together instead of being in different buckets spread all over the place.
I'd first like to thank our witness, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, for testifying here and in today's earlier closed session, and for his long and distinguished career, both in the intelligence community and in the Department of Defense. Dr. Kirkpatrick, you can give your testimony.
It's a privilege to be here today and testify on the defense.
Hello?
I'm so sorry I missed your text. Can I do it now?
Okay.
Sorry, can I do it now?
Can.
Okay, bye. Okay.
identified.
Do you know Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick?
So Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is a physicist by training. In his last assignment, he worked for the Space Command, and he worked in their intelligence shop. He's very well suited and qualified by dint of his training and background to lead this effort. But it's early days, so it remains to be seen how this is going to come out and where it's going.
This is an issue of government transparency. We can't trust a government that does not trust its people. We're not bringing little green men or flying saucers into the hearing. Sorry to disappoint about half y'all. We're just going to get to the facts. We're going to uncover the cover-up, and I hope this is just the beginning of many more hearings and more people coming forward about this.
This has become something you're vocal about, and I'm just wondering, how do your constituents feel about you being vocal on this front?
I get a little ribbing, but I don't give a rip. Mind you, I go out, take my dogs out to go to the bathroom every night in the backyard, and I look at those stars, and literally the concept of light years that comes into play. I always think, I look at some of those stars, and the light from those stars literally left that star before the time of Christ. So you think in God's vast universe that there could not be something else. And to think also, I mean, it's kind of arrogant on our part to think that we're the best that God can do. I mean, come on. Since 1947, the Pentagon's been lying to us about UFOs. They've covered this thing up from day one. You look at Roswell in 1947, the military comes out and says, we've recovered the saucer. And then the next day, they drop that poor colonel out holding the hot air balloon. And there's no way in hell that they would have messed that up. You know, military intelligence is a whole lot like congressional ethics. It really just doesn't exist. What's going to happen is somebody's going to have to walk out with some information with one of these craft, either on the ground or flying, before they, commit suicide by shooting themselves in the back of the head 5 times.
I have legislation for this year's defense bill to guarantee that Aero, they have access to special access programs, which are typically compartmentalized and highly classified, to make sure they're actually getting to see all the previous data, all the previous information. So all of those SAPs are opened to Dr. Kirkpatrick and the Aero team to review, to analyze, to understand. And so hopefully whatever doors are still closed will be opened in the next year.
And you mean the data that stretches back decades, even to the Second World War or the 40s, 50s?
So the first time anyone's seen unidentified aerial phenomenon and reported it to the federal government. So we want that data so that can be used as a holistic review of what is the history. All of that should be co-located and reviewed scientifically. The military is not comfortable with bad data, bad facts, or things that they don't know the answer to. And so that's why Senator Rubio and I and others teamed up to begin to look at this much more intensely.
If you look at what's happening now, it's about Navy pilots and graves, what they're reporting from the cockpit. But these budget questions really focus on the Air Force.
If you look at the Air Force budget, a significant share of it actually isn't theirs. It's the intelligence communities. And it's for all the secret programs. But it's sort of budgeted through the Air Force budget. The Air Force complains that, like, you look at the Air Force budget and you think, oh, we get the same as the Army and the Navy. We don't really, because there's this huge chunk that's the pass-through budget. It's actually not our stuff. It's the CIA drone program and, God knows what else. We do know that the government spends billions every year on secret aircraft drones. I wonder if they don't want to play in this, not because they're hiding aliens, but if Arrow is picking around and wants to know where's all the SAPs, the special access programs that might shed light on advanced technologies, and you're the Air Force, you don't want to open that up. The SR-71 Blackbird, Cold War spy plane, the F-117 stealth fighter, the B-2 bomber, those things were secret for 30 or 40 years. So imagine what they have now.
My goal is to make sure that the parts that are appropriate to be made public are made public. And that's why we need the public reporting every year. And that's why we created the office, because we wanted to have a thorough scientific review of everything that's classified, unclassified, and publicly available, so that we just have more information and that we have more clarity. The way the issue came to me was how those pilots were treated. That they weren't necessarily being believed, or they were being disregarded in some way. It became a very important issue for me.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York is leading an effort to change the way the military handles the problem of sexual assault in the armed forces. Gillibrand points to victims who complain that too often commanders ignore their allegations.
Did you see a correlation, I guess? I know they're very distinct, two different issues.
There's always a correlation. Military sexual assault has been covered up. Sexual harassment's been covered up. These cases often don't see the light of day. And on the UAP side, it's something the military didn't want to talk about publicly. They were addressing it from my perspective in a very paternalistic way that's not validating that something actually happened to them. I think it's duplicitous and inappropriate.
Ryan, when you say that you want to get to a point where people feel comfortable reporting them, do they not?
It's a big risk to go publicly on this topic. At the end of the day, if you're going to highlight yourself, at least in the military aviation communities, for something like this, there's very little upside for you. In the Navy, we deal with problems after the fact and not before the fact. We fix things after people die, and we write our procedures and our lessons of blood. And, I think there's opportunity perhaps to avoid that in this scenario.
I've heard many reports that service members who witnessed unidentified aerial phenomenon and reported it on the instruments that they had available to them were often disregarded or disbelieved or retaliated against for coming forward with information about these sightings. Those individuals are whistleblowers and they should be heard.
One of the biggest moves Congress has taken is to enact this law that includes a process for people within the military, within the spy agencies to come forward to Congress, but also to the Pentagon Arrow office with their testimony. In other words, if, they signed a non-disclosure agreement and were told never talk about this secret program, you sort of get a get-out-of-jail-free card. You can come forward. There's supposed to be a process for that to help Congress unearth some of these programs that might exist that have not seen the light of day.
The UAP task force has refused access to a broad crash retrieval program.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
David Grush is undoubtedly the biggest whistleblower that we've ever had in history. I mean, he's the first official whistleblower that came forward with the legislation that came out in the NDAA. And he's saying that I've interviewed all of these people. It was my job to interview all of these people. I was sent out to do it. I had the clearances. These people were telling him that they had first-hand experience with craft and with biologics.
So right now, there are whistleblower cases happening around this issue. So anybody out there who may have been involved in a program related to UAP, black programs related to this topic, particularly if they think it may not have been appropriated by Congress and authorized, they can now come forward and share that information in a secure environment without violating the law or their obligations.
We now have a number of very senior government officials with very high security clearances that are coming forward to basically say, we believe there are secret programs buried deep in the bureaucracy that are hiding either UFO crash materials or, some other sort of exotic technology that we don't think is human-made. And just the simple fact that that's happening, it's not just people from the fringe, it's not, people just claiming that they believe this or that. These are the people that are entrusted with the nation's secrets. Some of them are coming forward and saying, hey, there's more to learn here, and we want to help you find out. And I think that's remarkable.
Because I helped those people from the government and the Aerospace Corporation that showed up in my office and gave them advice on how to do the kinds of analysis they wanted to do, they started coming back to me for more. A case in point is the Atacama mummy, which many people know about. I was brought to help study it because somebody thought it was an alien. In fact, I have to be honest. I mean, I reached out to them and said, "You're claiming it's an alien. I can prove or disprove it, at least looking at its DNA, if it has DNA." I had 2 other Stanford professors, specialists in genetics, a bunch of graduate students, and I had the world's expert in pediatric bone disorders on the paper. That, of course, went worldwide. And you know what the title was? Stanford Professor Sequences DNA of Alien Baby. It was all over the world. I eventually proved that it was a human stillbirth with multiple mutations and bone dysmorphias. My entree to the UFO community was, the hated one. The guy who disproved that it was an alien. It's one of those weird ones where Gary Nolan's a significant character because the subject has lacked that scientific connection. So we rely on people like Gary Nolan to say, I've seen the evidence and this is how I've assessed the evidence. And we need people like Gary to do that for us. Because I'd gotten a Department of Defense award for doing ovarian cancer that came about at the same time that I was doing the work, I was accused of being bought off. These kinds of conspiracy things that you never live down. I still see it in Reddit forums every once in a while. Science can be done on these things because there's a whole bunch of data on the table. But once you start looking amongst all the puzzle pieces, interesting stuff starts to show up.
I was always driven by curiosity. I was at a boarding school when I was 7 years old, and the headmaster of the school, one of his neighbors, had taken a home movie of a UFO from his backyard. And the headmaster of the school was so excited about this, he felt we all needed to see this movie. We all saw a 3 to 5 minute segment of a massive golden dish-shaped object. And one of the things that was interesting was clouds look opaque, big cumulus clouds, white. But when something goes into it, you see it's actually not very dense, it's wispy. This is way before computer-generated imagery. This is Kodak, reel-to-reel kind of stuff. So I don't know how that could have been faked. And it went into the cloud, eventually disappeared, and then came out the other side. I was thunderstruck, and a bunch of us went running outside looking at the night sky that night, see if we could see something. And I started reading every book I could get my hands on. It gave me a lifelong interest. For years, there was virtually no discussion in mainstream leading news outlets, and yet meanwhile, local papers, there were thousands and thousands of reports from small communities all over the world, where people in their community had experiences and seen things, the local doctor or the mayor. So there was a huge disconnect between the national media and the regional media. And why is there such a paradox? In 1950, I believe it was May of 1950, Enrico Fermi was a nuclear physicist, one of the fathers of the atom bomb. He was one of the seminal physicists involved in advancing research and our understanding of quantum mechanics and subatomic particles and so forth. He continued to visit Los Alamos after the atom bomb was developed during the summers. He was in the cafeteria lunching with some other scientists, and the issue of alien life came up. And he made this wisecrack. Well, where is everybody? And everybody had a good chuckle about that, but that has become known as Fermi's paradox. If there's life in the universe and life elsewhere in our galaxy, how come we don't see any evidence? We don't detect any radio signals, etc. The ironic thing is that even as he was saying that, the director of security at Los Alamos had his hair on fire because there were so many UFO sightings right around Los Alamos. At the very same time he said that, everybody around Los Alamos, the the security people, pilots, scientists, everybody was seeing these things. Just a few months before, there was an overflight of about 100 UAP over the town of Farmington, New Mexico. You know, front page news across the states. And so it's this huge disconnect with people in the scientific community saying, how come there's no evidence? And meanwhile, there's these things that could be alien probes that are swerving all around the very facility where they're saying this.
Oh my God, what is that?
Wait, are you recording that right now?
Yeah, we're recording. What the fuck is that?
The cabin was our place, our little country place, and we certainly didn't expect anything peculiar to happen there. But after that night, I became scared. I bought a shotgun, I bought a pistol. I was really strung out. I heard I had been assaulted, and that was obvious to me. I mean, I had a mark on the side of my head. I had been rectally injured. I was obviously the victim of an assault of some sort, but when?
An expedition in the Arizona wilderness, Travis Walton is taken by forces beyond our understanding. Now, new evidence suggests the supposed alien abduction might actually be true. At the turn of the century, aviator Charles Lindbergh Rosenberg's family is destroyed in the most horrifying way imaginable. And a recent theory about the identity of a suspect is almost too terrible to imagine. And at this very moment, American spies and diplomats are under siege from a mysterious enemy. For the first time ever, I'll uncover extraordinary revelations behind these terrifying attacks. In the corridors of time are mysteries that defy explanation. Now, I'm traveling through history itself on a search for the truth. New evidence. Shocking answers. I'm Josh Gates, and these are my expedition files. I was 9 years old when my neighborhood nemesis, Jimmy Donovan, walked up to me in the schoolyard and punched me square in the face. It hurt. It's not a pain I'll forget, and I won't forget who did it either. Jimmy Donovan. But disturbingly, some attackers are unknown, hurting us without ever revealing who or what they are. Tonight, we study the files of 3 people whose brutal attackers remain unknown. From a terrifying UFO abduction in the Arizona wilderness, to an unimaginable crime that shocked the nation, to a shadowy superweapon first fired at innocent American diplomats in Cuba. For each of our 3 stories, the question remains the same. Who was behind these shocking attacks? We begin here, just after dark in the White Mountains of Arizona in the fall of 1975.
When we get back, remind me that we need to put some gas in the chainsaw for the bottom.
For these 7 young men, it's a night they'll both never forget and also struggle to remember. They've been working all day, chopping down the pine trees that cover these mountains. What they don't know is that their drive back to town will become a road trip like no other. One of these men will suddenly vanish in jaw-dropping circumstances, setting off one of the most gripping and bizarre missing person cases in history. Pretty soon, people all across the country and the world will be asking, what really happened to Travis Walton? In the summer of 1975, Travis Walton is a member of a 7-man logging crew hired to thin out trees in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. They're a tight-knit, hard-working group. Then, several months into the job, on November 5th, as they head back to town, everything in their world changes. As they drive along the rocky forest road that they've traveled countless times before, suddenly the men are stunned by a large, mysterious object floating in the sky. While fear grips the rest of the crew, something inexplicably draws Travis Walton towards the light.
Come back here! Travis, come back! Hey, Travis, come on back here, man! Travis!
Gripped with panic, his friends flee the scene. 15 15 minutes later, when the light appears to be gone, they return to the site to find nothing. No craft, no light, no Travis. Their friend has vanished. So they race to the nearest phone to call the sheriff, Chuck Ellison.
Our friend's been taken.
Though he's skeptical, Sheriff Ellison accompanies the men back to the scene.
Travis! Travis! Travis, come back! Travis! Travis!
But after a search that drags late into the night, they're forced to call off the hunt as the temperature plummets. If Travis is out there somewhere, he's in for a brutally cold night. Over the next 5 days, the sheriff's office and volunteers frantically search the area. In an odd moment that would become relevant decades later, the logging foreman and others recall an investigator using a Geiger counter. When they test the men's hard hats, the needle jumps way up. But let's file that away for now, because this small logging crew is about to have their feet held to the fire. 3 days after Travis goes missing, the sheriff's department administers polygraph tests for the 6 loggers. The men deny any involvement in Travis's disappearance, and they all recount the same bright light in the sky. They pass with flying colors, but there's still no explanation for where Travis Walton could be. 5 days after Travis's disappearance, his brother-in-law receives a call.
Hello? Who is this?
It's Travis.
He's stumbled to a payphone on the outskirts of a small town about 10 miles from where he disappeared.
Travis, buddy, you're gonna be okay.
When they find him, all he remembers is waking up earlier that night, lying flat on the road, with a light above him that disappeared. But in the days to come, Travis would remember more and more. And what he remembers transforms this from a simple missing persons case to an out-of-this-world alien abduction nightmare, unlike anything anyone had heard before. When the word gets out to the public, newspapers all over the world run with the story, creating a feverish interest that will last decades. But doubters also come out of the woodwork. The loggers are accused of fabricating an elaborate hoax to get them off the hook from running behind schedule on their logging contract. Other skeptics write it off as ball lightning, a run-in with a military craft, drug-induced hallucinations, or simply a drunken prank. But Travis and the rest of the logging crew stand by their story, and none of the alternative theories can be proven. But if it all really happened, where is the evidence? Well, some of the best evidence is Travis himself. Blood tests taken soon after Travis's return come back completely clean for drugs and any intoxicants. Though he is dehydrated and a few pounds lighter, 5 nights of no food in the forest should have left his body much more malnourished.
You're gonna be okay.
And perhaps the most amazing thing is that Travis survived at all. At night, the forest can reach below freezing temperatures. Few could survive such an ordeal wearing just jeans and a flannel shirt. Another point in Travis's favor is that he, just like the other crew members, takes a polygraph test. He too passes. So at the very least, Travis believes his own story. And as days turn to weeks, months, years, and even decades, Travis's story always stays remarkably consistent, never changing or shifting like lies sometimes do. And Travis seemed genuinely honest that the event had affected him deeply, when I sat down with him 40 years later.
For years, the memory was so clear that every time I recounted the events, that I would re-experience that level of fear. My heart and respiration would go way up, and I would just be drenched in sweat after describing what had happened at that time.
Well, thank you for letting us consider the facts. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. The Travis Walton story has been a mystery for 50 years, but it may not be a mystery for much longer. Thanks to an unexpected find at the original site, we may be able to reveal the remarkable truth of his story. Was Travis Walton really abducted by aliens, as he and his friends claim? It's a question that has puzzled the public for decades, but now there may finally be an answer. In 2014, UFO researcher and former federal agent Ben Hansen returns to the clearing site of the original incident with Travis by his side to try and uncover any remaining evidence of the so-called UFO encounter. They located the exact spot of the supposed abduction, and, as it turned out, they found compelling new evidence that Hansen thinks could be the smoking gun.